It was either dinner with Crazy Frog or $1,000,000. Of course I took the dinner. Oh, hey, how's it going? Currently I'm working on the premiere of a new album roundup series. That's gonna be coming out next week, but before then, I wanted to give you something in the meantime. Recently, I got to give a virtual talk at Belmont University about the music that defined the 2010s video. I talked about the inspiration and process behind it, and I got to answer some student questions about where I think pop music could go in the 2020s. Belmont was kind enough to give me a recording of said talk and permission to post it. So this is me doing that. I want to give a massive thank you to Dr. Amy Crook and her students for inviting me, for submitting thoughtful questions, and for making my entrance music run away with me. I felt so at home. So, with all that, here's the talk I gave, starting now.
So I just wanted to talk a little bit about, the process of the video, what I did to research it, and then eventually get into questions that Dr. Cook had sent me, and then hopefully open the floor to more questions as well, because I value all of your questions and I want to make sure we have as much time for them as possible. So a little bit more background about me, just so you all know where I'm coming from personally. I've studied music for most of my life. I am a vocalist by trade. I went to school at the University of Massachusetts Lowell for audio engineering, though there they call it sound recording technology. And then after college, about 6 or 7 months, I started the channel. If you were to go back and look at any of those older videos, a lot of them were more focused on music theory. The first one I ever did, for example, was on Taylor Swift's Reputation. I did the one on Carly Rae Jepsen, War on Drugs, things like that. But over time, the channel has kind of morphed more into larger conceptual topics, kind of like the 2010s. I did one on Glee that you might have seen. That was a real doozy of a video to do. Ringtones, hyperpop, those kinds of larger topics. So the 2010s video specifically kind of started as a thought experiment where I asked myself, how can I tell the story of 2010s popular music with as few artists as possible? Because, a whole entire decade has so many little different touch points and moments of influence of, shaking up the game, things like that. But I thought to myself, is there a way to take that giant ball of wibbly wobbly stuff and kind of create this kind of line of saying, like, this is where it started, here's this artist or this album that moved it to this point, so on and so forth, to the 2019. So the research for the video started in September 2019. The initial process for it was just compiling as many research links as I could, Billboard year-end article lists, just to see like what was popular during that given year. I included a few articles from Nielsen, as well as the I'm going to forget the acronym, but it's like the International Phonograph Federation, something like that. Just to have as much context as I could. From there, I also went and looked for articles that were talking about records, either at the time that they were released or later down the line as a retrospective, videos and podcasts as well. And then from there, I was compiling lists of the notable albums and saying, okay, here are like the main records and the main songs from this year. Which ones were the most impactful for that year, if any of them were. So I've also included a few pictures here of the initial documents. It's about 23 pages long. As you can see, I haven't made any edits to it. It's as pristine as it was back in February. If you're wondering why that title is misspelled in that way, it's because in the early years of my channel, I used to do this thing as an in-joke to myself where I would misspell in a humorous way the names of the video. I don't know if that's funny now, but that's why I did that. So yeah, as you can see, Metacritic was also a massive part of that. Billboard articles, like I said. I mentioned before, this document was about 23 pages long. I think about 10 to 12 of them were purely of articles. And as you can see on the right page there, I sorted them by, in terms of chronological order. And the ones that are bold there were the ones that I was like, okay, there's something here that I want to cite in this video. And so on and so forth. But the full document is, I think, still in the description of the video if you wanted to see the full breakdown of what I had covered. List of videos as well. I don't think all of these videos made it into the final video. I think the only one that did was the Dead End Hip Hop moment, or the video where Mike Seatown says, like, this guy wrote a song about fighting with his girlfriend at a cheesecake factory, something like that. And then of course, Adam Neely as well. He's done some great legal breakdowns of, music theory. And I believe those videos I had cited when I thought blurred lines was going to be more of a central part of the video and how it kind of fed into a changing landscape for music copyright. He recently did one on Olivia Rodrigo and Paramore. That's well worth checking out. And then of course, the list of the records that came out that year, the ones in bold were the ones I thought were the most important to talk about. And then at the end of the document is just the preliminary list of the records I wanted to talk about, the dates they came out, and the musical elements or the elements about them that I wanted to talk about in the video. Now, in terms of the process itself that I went through, initially I wanted to do my best to pick music and to pick artists that had made some kind of tactile, measurable change, because I worried that if I went too far, well, let me step back for a second. I went into this video understanding that because I am a one-man show in terms of the things that I make, a lot of my own biases and assumptions will somehow maneuver their way into the video. And I wanted to do my best to prevent that from happening as much as possible. And this was the first step of that. So for example, Psy's Gangnam Style was, a huge song, lots of memes made about it. You could speak to its power and the power of memes in marketing a piece of music. But the main thing I wanted to focus on was the fact that in large part because of that song, the Billboard charts changed their metrics to include YouTube and at the same time streaming or later down the line streaming, which made something like, Harlem Shake the next year blow up in popularity predominantly because of YouTube streams. So that was like what I wanted to do in terms of finding songs that, did something and then made some kind of change for the music landscape after the fact. In terms of a situation like The Weeknd and Drake, they had very similar vibes in the early part of the 2010s. And I was thinking to myself like, oh, do I want to include the House of Balloon trilogy, or the trilogy mixtape trilogy, I should say, with the House of Balloons, or do I want to include Take Care? Because I was noticing this phenomenon sometimes where one smaller, more underground artist would sort of cultivate a sound, and then another artist would take that sound and push it into the mainstream. One example from the 2000s would be, T-Pain kind of popularizing auto-tune and R&B. Kanye West finds that, brings him on as a consultant for 808s and Heartbreak, and then that album blows up and inspires a whole bunch of future rap stars. In this particular case, I wanted to see, The Weeknd had his own sound kind of nailed from the get-go, but I still want to include Drake in some way because he was, an absolutely massive figure in the 2010s, which is why I ultimately went with The House of Balloons in 2011 and then Views in 2016 because of Drake's business skills and his savviness with creating a record that was inspired by the streaming landscape and that could be rewarded with that kind of process in mind. Financial success was something that I was torn up about at first. The example I use here is Adele's 21. Massive, massive, huge record. I don't think anybody could say otherwise. It achieved numbers that records had not achieved since, the 90s. But I was cautious about equating financial success or chart success with influence. I don't know if they're necessarily the same thing. Sometimes they are, but with Adele, she has that like soulful throwback sound that, I don't want to paint necessarily a broad brush, but it didn't really impact the main core sound of the decade. It was very much its own thing, and that's what made Adele special as a songwriter and musician. Another example of that would be Kanye West. I got a ton of comments on the video talking about, Kanye West isn't on here, Life of Pablo, Yeezus, like all that stuff. And my thinking was, Kanye's an absolutely massive artist, but in my opinion, a lot of his more influential work in terms of the sound of his music and of the music, following was in the 2000s, the College Dropout, 808s and Heartbreak, like I mentioned earlier. And it was really in the 2000s with, My Beautiful Dark Twisted Fantasy and Yeezus, where he kind of entered this place where he could really do whatever he wanted and people would pay attention. Like Yeezus could be this abrasive record. He could do things on Life of Pablo that he may not have been able to do otherwise. He could get the Glub Go Gab Galab to drop a verse on the new record. It was just really that kind of thing where he could do whatever he wanted. And, you know, like someone like Taylor Swift kind of entered that same plane in the 2010s with, you know, Lover and Reputation, where she could really do whatever she want and shift things. But at the same time, you know, there were artists who were guiding the sound a little bit more in total. So I wanted to focus on them more so. But I did eventually include Kanye into the 2000s video, if you've seen that. And then finally, like I mentioned before, I wanted to go into this knowing that I would not be making, you know, the definitive, in a weird way, a video that's called The Music That Defined the 2010s, I knew would not be the definitive thing. Because, you know, I wouldn't be able to include everybody of recognition. And, you know, the main criteria I had for the video was in terms of the sound and the release strategy and things like that. But of course, music is bigger than just the music. You know, it's in the marketing, it's in the presentation. And, you know, people like Lady Gaga, Nicki Minaj, I did a lot outside of the music as well to become the figures that they are. But at the same time, I just had to recognize, you know, that might not be possible to include everybody in that way. I use an image of Lana Del Rey here because personally, I'm not a huge fan of all of her albums. I like a lot of some of the ones that she's done, but there are other ones like Born to Die that I haven't clicked with. But as I went through the research process, it was pretty much like if I did not include her in some way, I would just be omitting a major part of the 2000s. So still, I included her in. So that was the 2010s video, basically in a nutshell. If you watch me at all, you might also know that I put out a 2000s video, a sequel or prequel, if you will, earlier this year. Basically, the process was essentially the same in the start, just finding, you know, Billboard, Nielsen, Metacritic, just kind of getting a broad overview of the year in terms of that sense. But there was one thing I was finding as I got more into the articles, and again, I don't want to paint a broad brush necessarily. I'm sure some writers are doing it, but I don't know if we're at that point yet where the 2000s in terms of music is being reevaluated and retrospected. I think we're just starting to see that now, not only with writers, but with some artists incorporating 2000 music elements into their sound. I'm reminded of the new Lorde record, which had a lot of people comparing it to, you know, Natasha Bedingfield, Michelle Branch, Natalie Imbruglia, and that sort of thing. So I wouldn't be able to cite as many writers as I did last time. Instead, what I wanted to do was I was coming across videos of popular artists today citing, you know, musicians who they were inspired by and who were a huge part of their musical journey. And I wanted to include clips of them. So for example, I used a clip of Tyler, the Creator, talking about, what was it, NERD's In Search Of, and how that was kind of like the record that made him want to get into music. Or, you know, Amy Winehouse and how Billie Eilish, Adele, Lana Del Rey have all cited her as inspirations for what they're doing now. So I thought that that was a good way to kind of differentiate and add a series of new voices into the process that hadn't been there before necessarily. So along with the research process, Dr. Crook sent me over some of your questions. Lindsay, thank you for this. How do you think TikTok will affect the future trends of the pop music industry? I think that there's going to be an emphasis towards sort of short form, multi-touch rollout campaigns. I know that I mentioned in the video the idea that, you know, songs were being restructured in the streaming age so that the chorus was going first, so that that most salient hook was getting you right at first, and you don't have to wait, you know, 30, 40, 50 seconds to get into it. Along with that, especially in the TikTok age, I think the question a lot of people should be asking is, how usable is the song that we have for new interpretations and for ways to use it in videos, i.e. memes? One of the examples I've seen, if any of you guys are on TikTok, you might have seen there's a guy who like takes a drone out into random places and like cues up keyframes to move along with his like his butt shaking essentially, and it syncs to Stay by the Kid Laroi and Justin Bieber. And you know, like he's, you know, that one video is like fine on its own, it's whatever, but it's the fact that he's done it in different places. It's the fact that he's done it with like Bella Porch, Dr. Phil, Jason Derulo, and it's just not even just like a one-time thing that you remember. It's like almost every single day, or like what feels like multiple times a week, you are inundated with this guy and the song Stay by the Kid Laroi. And I think in a lot of ways, that's why that song has kind of burned itself into my head specifically. Other than that, you know, I think it's a catchy song, but just having that as well as a sort of secondary thing, I think helped as well. And as another example, as another example, Lil Nas X, who I think with the rollout for Industry Baby and the new record he has coming out, has proven himself to be a marketing savant. He is absolutely brilliant with what he does, because it's not just the song itself. It's, you get videos of him playing clips of the song in other TikToks that are unrelated to the song leading up to the song's release. You get, the song itself, the music video itself, you get the memes that are made after the fact. Yeah, you just get this whole other realm of things, so that it's not necessarily just one touch point, but it's rather, this one song is now stretched out to, like a month-long campaign, just in the hope of like somebody sees it even once, but hopefully someone sees it multiple times and they just have that seared into their brain as well. This question, Maya, thank you for this. How important do you think having a large album rollout is? Have we reached a point in time when social media and the fans can do all the heavy lifting themselves? Or do you think big label pushes are still necessary? I can be of two minds when it comes to this. You often hear the phrase or the thought that, social media has leveled the playing field in terms of artists and who can get popular. And to some extent, I believe that to be true. But at the same time, social media is a great way to get attention, but not necessarily to keep it. And I think on its own, if you try to rely only on social media, unless it's like a lightning in a bottle thing, like Lil Nas X with Old Town Road, you run the risk of trying to get people's attention in the wrong way. There's an example, there's somebody on TikTok now by the name of Lael, and you might have seen her because she does the video that starts with, "My life sucks. I'm an artist from the middle of nowhere. I don't want to sell my soul. My videos are going to win awards. My best friend betrayed me. If you get the song to 10,000 pre-saves, I'll be so happy." And it's that kind of thing where, it's the general marketing idea of, you don't necessarily want to be against something. Your product doesn't always want to stand against something. And, I think just because of the fact that that video blew up, she did get a couple thousand pre-saves on the song. But in return, there are now, hundreds of thousands of people who know her from that kind of condescending tone. And that's the image that's in their mind now. So even when she does like apology videos, like I think she did one recently, it's still that idea of like, that's how she tried to like introduce herself, as against something in that negative way. So in that sense, I think label support helps with just getting the song out there in a way that social media may not always do. Also recognizing that, I feel like a lot of people are on social media, but that's not necessarily the main way a lot of people are getting music. Some people still listen to radio. Some people discover artists on TV, that sort of thing. But at the same time, that kind of organic social interaction and engagement is still incredibly crucial. And if you don't do that, then you come off as looking like, I'm not always a fan of this term, but an industry plant. I think there was another example back when Justin Bieber was promoting Yummy back in the very early 2020. And there were a lot of promotion things where he did, where he was like, if you want to get Yummy to #1 on the charts, then you need to go do this dance or do this thing on Spotify and something like that. And it just kind of came off as very forced, and it not letting the song itself do the thing that the song should do, which is provide a soundtrack to somebody's day and give them some kind of emotion. So then the next question here, I laugh, you'll find out why I'm laughing in a second. How do you think the pandemic will affect the music industry in the sense of the music being created? David, thank you for this question. So at first, I thought we were going to see a return to that early 2010 style of electropop, where it was, very much about letting your cares melt away, getting rid of them, not having your mind on them, and just focusing on having a good time. Granted, that was back when I thought the pandemic would only last a few months. That did not pan out. So the question I've tried to think of an answer to is, what happens when something close to normalcy returns? And I know some people say, like, when COVID is over, I think COVID's going to be with us for a very long time, even after we're at a point where, masks are no longer required indoors and outdoors. But let's say like we're at a point where it's like people can be in, clubs again without that kind of mask or that kind of protocol. What kind of music gets popular then? And I think two things potentially could be possible. If we want to see a return to music as an escape, I think a lot of the groundwork has been laid for a full-on proper disco revival, or even something further than what we've seen already. You know, people like The Weeknd and Dua Lipa have done great work in getting that kind of sound as a, you know, defining sound of this current time. I think the new single The Weeknd has is like even leaning into that even more. So maybe they're trying to kind of lay the, you know, they're trying to get that music out now so that when tours and things come back in a full sense, they have music that's ready to go. That's just like, forget about all that. We made it through. Let's party till the sun rises, something like that. At the same time, though, and I think somebody brought this up in another question, we also have this pop punk sound that's kind of being brought back up in part because of, you know, Olivia Rodrigo and Machine Gun Kelly. And I think that's kind of a vessel for music as catharsis. You know, we've had a year and a half of just really frustrating things going on in the world. We get back to a concert and we just want to let loose. We just want to like excise that kind of feeling from us. And I think the pop punk revival could do that if it blows up to be sort of like a main sound of this time. There we go. And then the last question I have on here, Cody, thank you for the question. Do you believe that all pop music moving forward will be some hodgepodge of themes, or will there be a point where there's too much blending of different genres? And to me, I think that the hodgepodge has kind of created a baseline expectation of what popular music sounds like. You know, you have like that kind of like deep underwater intro coming on, then like a subtle beat with like a wispy voice. Like that's kind of like, you can almost hear that in your head or even think of a song that matches that. So we have this baseline for it. And I think at some point in this decade, something's going to come along that just blows the lid off of the current sound. I'm reminded of, you know, the late 80s where, you know, a certain kind of electro pop and hair metal were kind of the defining sounds. A lot of people were sick of them. And then early 90s, bam, Nirvana just comes in and opens the lid on alt rock in the mainstream, something like that. In part, I think the fun of that is whatever it is going to be surprising to all of us. So I'm not going to say definitively that this is the sound that will do it. If I had to put money on it, though, I'd say it's hyperpop. And if any of you are interested in that genre, there's a remix album of Lady Gaga's Chromatica that came out last year. This new remix album came out, I think, last week or the week before, and it has remixes from people like Arca, Rina Sawayama, Clarence Clarity, Charlie XCX, A.G. Cook, like these kind of figures that are driving the hyperpop sound forward. And it was funny because I always thought Billie Eilish was going to be the one to put that sound to the mainstream based on her first record. And then her new record came out a few months ago, and that just did not happen. I think she's just interested in doing other things with her sound. But then Lady Gaga comes out with this, and I was like, oh, is Lady Gaga the one who might do it? Has she been the one who might do it all this time? So yeah, that's my thoughts of what could potentially happen. And that brings me to the end of this deck, at least. I want to say thank you again, Dr. Crook, for inviting me in, as well as all of you for watching the video and having me here today. If you have any questions specifically for me, my Twitter and IG handles are Mike the Snare, and the YouTuber inside of me would not feel complete if I didn't ask you all to smash that subscribe button. And if, yeah. Yeah, and check out the rest of the channel if you're interested. But yeah, again, thank you all for having me very much. And if we still have time, I'd love to get into some other questions.
Yeah, thanks so much. Well, let's go ahead and clap now so we don't forget later. Thanks so much. Just one.